He was ready to get married. But after what the bride said, the wedding was called off. Jason Miller adjusted his bow tie for the third time in 5 minutes, feeling sweat form little droplets on his forehead, despite the air conditioning in the sacristy. At 28 years old, he had dreamed of this moment since he proposed to Emily 2 years ago, but now a strange feeling took over his stomach. It all started when Emily approached him minutes before the ceremony was about to begin, pulling him into a private corner while her bridesmaids Jessica and Amber tried to contain the nervous laughter escaping the bride's lips. "Jay, I need to tell you something before we enter the church," whispered Emily, her voice trembling in a way he had never heard before. "Now, Em, the ceremony is going to start in 10 minutes, replied Jason, watching the face of the woman he loved change expression as if a dark cloud had passed over the sun. "That's exactly why I need to speak now." "Later will be too late," she said, squeezing his hands between hers. "What I'm about to tell you could change everything." Jason felt his heart race. In recent months, he had noticed that Emily had been acting strange, distant, as if carrying a weight he couldn't understand. During the wedding preparations, she would sometimes be overly excited, other times completely absent, lost in thoughts she didn't share with anyone. "Emily, you're scaring me." "What happened?" he asked, searching for her eyes that now avoided his. It was at this moment that Jessica and Amber approached, realizing something serious was happening. The three had been friends since childhood, grew up together in the same neighborhood in Denver, and the bridesmaids knew Emily well enough to know when she was about to make a decision that would change her life forever. "Em, are you sure now is the time?" asked Jessica, her voice filled with concern. "He needs to know, Jess." "I can't live with this anymore," replied Amber, surprising everyone. "Jason has the right to know the truth before saying I do at the altar. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out now continuing. Truth? What truth? Jason felt a wave of panic rise through his chest. "Emily, for heaven's sake, just tell me what's going on." Emily took a deep breath as if preparing to jump off a cliff. Her hands were shaking and she had to lean against the wall to keep from staggering. "My name isn't Emily Johnson," she began, each word coming out like a painful whisper. "My real name is Rebecca Taylor, and I'm not who you think I am." The world around Jason seemed to slow down. The sounds of the church in the background, where more than 200 guests awaited the start of the ceremony, became a distant echo. He blinked several times, trying to process what he had just heard. "What do you mean you're not who I think you are?" His voice came out louder than intended. "Em, I don't understand any of this. We've been together for 4 years." "That's exactly it, Jay. During all these 4 years, I've lived a lie." Tears began to roll down Emily's carefully made-up face. "When we met, I was running away from my real life. And you fell in love with the person I made up." Jessica approached and put her hand on her friend's shoulder, while Amber watched Jason, trying to decipher his reaction. The three knew this moment would come eventually, but none of them imagined it would be right there, minutes before the wedding was to begin. "Running from what? Emily, you have to explain this properly." Jason ran his hands through his hair, messing up the hairstyle that had taken an hour to perfect. "What real life? What were you running from?" Emily looked at her friends as if asking permission to continue. Amber nodded encouragingly, while Jessica squeezed her hand in silent support. "I was married, Jay." The confession hit Jason like a punch to the gut. "When we met, I was still married to Brian. And not just married, and I had just found out I was pregnant." The silence that followed was deafening. Jason felt his legs tremble and had to lean on the nearest chair. His mind struggled to process the information, trying to piece together a puzzle he never knew existed. "Pregnant" was the only word he managed to utter. "I lost the baby at 3 months, Emily continued, her voice breaking with every word. "That's when I discovered Brian had been cheating on me for over a year. My world collapsed all at once. I lost my child, discovered the betrayal, and on top of it all, my mother got sick. I couldn't stay in my city anymore. I couldn't look anywhere without remembering all that pain." Jason tried to process each piece of information, each revelation that came like waves in a storm. The woman he had met at a mutual friend's party, the cheerful and carefree woman who had won him over with her easy smile and spontaneity, had never really existed. So you just ran away? Changed your name and pretended to be someone else? His voice came out rough, filled with a mixture of anger and despair. I didn't pretend to be someone else, Jay. I became the person I always wanted to be, Emily tried to explain, reaching her hands toward him, but Jason instinctively pulled back. Away from all that pain, away from that life that was suffocating me, I could truly be myself. The Emily you met is real. She always existed inside me, but was buried under all that suffering. But you were legally married. How are you going to marry me? Jason felt reality collapsing around him like a house of cards. Amber stepped forward, deciding it was time to tell her part in the story. The divorce was finalized 6 months ago, Jay, she said, avoiding his gaze. I helped Em with all the paperwork. Brian didn't contest anything. In fact, he seemed relieved. He'd been living with the other woman for over a year. 6 months? Jason turned to Emily with a look of total disbelief. And you didn't tell me? Didn't you think I had the right to know that my fiancé was finalizing a divorce from a marriage I didn't even know existed? I tried to tell you many times, Jay. But every time I was about to start, you talked about our future, about the plans we had, about how perfect we were for each other. Emily wiped her tears with the backs of her hands. How was I going to shatter all that? How was I going to break the image you had of me? Jessica, who had remained silent until then, finally decided to speak. Jason, I know it's a lot to take in all at once, but you need to understand that Em suffered greatly before meeting you. She didn't lie out of malice or to deceive you. She lied because she was afraid of losing you. Losing me? Jason let out a bitter laugh. You think lying about having been married, about losing a child, about changing your name, about falsifying your identity is a way to not lose me? The sound of hurried footsteps in the hallway interrupted the conversation. The wedding planner, Mrs. Barbara, appeared with a worried expression. Everyone, the guests are starting to get restless. The priest is asking if everything is all right, she said, observing the tears on Emily's face and Jason's devastated expression. Did something happen? Mrs. Barbara, I think we're going to need a few more minutes, Jessica replied diplomatically. A few minutes? Jason passed his hands over his face. I need a few hours, or maybe a few days, or maybe a whole lifetime to understand what's going on here. Emily approached him again, this time managing to hold his hands before he could pull away. Jay, I know I made a huge mistake by not telling you sooner. I know I should have told you from the beginning. But please, don't let this destroy what we have. The love I feel for you is real. More real than anything I've ever felt in my life. Real? Jason looked into her eyes, searching for traces of the woman he thought he knew. Em, I don't even know what your real name is. How am I supposed to know if anything between us is real? My name is Rebecca, but I've always hated that name. Since I was a child, I asked everyone to call me Em. Emily was the name I wanted to have, you know? It's how I always wanted to be known. She spoke faster, as if words could fix 4 years of lies. And Johnson was my grandmother's last name, the only person in my family who always accepted me for who I was. I didn't invent a new person, Jay. I just chose to be the version of myself that you deserved to know. The version of you that I deserved? Jason sat down heavily in the chair, putting his head in his hands. Em, you didn't have the right to decide which version of you I deserved to know. You should have let me know the real you and decide for myself if I wanted to stay. Mrs. Barbara cleared her throat discreetly. Sorry to interrupt, but I need to know if you want me to say something to the guests. They're starting to whisper among themselves, and the groom's mother has already asked 3 times if everything is all right. The mention of Jason's mother made Emily turn even paler. Mrs. Deborah Johnson had never shown much affection for her, always hinting that there was something strange about Emily not talking much about her family or her past. If she found out the truth, my mother, Jason sighed deeply. Good Lord, my mother always said there was something strange about you. She always said you were hiding something important. Your mother never liked me anyway, Jay. That has nothing to do with what I'm telling you now. Emily tried to defend herself, but her voice sounded weak even to her. Maybe she's right. Maybe a mother senses these things. Jason stood up abruptly. 4 years, Emily. 4 years of my life based on lies. How am I supposed to look at you and not think it was all a sham? Amber, who until then had tried to give the couple space to talk, could no longer stay silent. Jason, stop it. Em may have lied about her past, but her feelings for you have always been true. I saw her fall in love with you. I saw her fight her own fears to build a life with you. She's not a fraud. Amber, please. Emily asked her friend to stop, but Amber was determined to defend who she considered a sister. No, Em. He needs to know everything. Amber turned to Jason with determination. You want to know the whole truth? Then you're going to hear the whole truth. Em spent 2 years in therapy to overcome the trauma of losing the baby. She had depression, panic attacks. Some days she couldn't even leave the house. When she met you, it was the first time in years that I saw her truly smile. You saved her, Jason. And now you're going to throw all that away because she didn't have the courage to relive the worst phase of her life, to tell you details that don't change anything about what you built together. Silence took over the room again. Jason processed the new information, trying to reorganize the image he had of Emily in his mind. Depression, panic attacks, loss of a child, a marriage destroyed by betrayal. Suddenly, many things started to make sense. The moments when she got strangely quiet when he talked about children, the times she changed the subject when he asked about ex-boyfriends. The anxiety attacks, she said, were because of work. Mrs. Barbara coughed again, louder this time. Everyone, I really need an answer. What do I tell the guests? Emily looked at Jason with pleading eyes, then at her friends, and finally at the organizer. Tell them that, she began, but Jason interrupted her. No, let me handle it. He stood up, smoothed his jacket, and walked toward the door. Mrs. Barbara, you can tell everyone that the wedding is cancelled, at least for today. Emily felt her world collapse. Her legs gave way, and she had to lean on Jessica to keep from falling. Jay, no, please don't do this. Her voice came out as a desperate moan. Emily, I need time to think. I need to understand who you really are. And you need to decide if you want to keep being Emily Johnson or if you want to go back to being Rebecca Taylor. Jason stopped at the door without turning to look at her. When you figure out who you truly are, come find me. Then we'll talk. But what about the guests? The party? The money? Jessica asked, trying to be practical amid the emotional chaos. The money is the least important thing right now, Jessica. Jason finally turned around, and Emily could see tears in his eyes. What matters is that I'm completely lost. I don't know who to trust anymore. I don't know what's true and what's a lie. With those words, Jason left the room, leaving Emily sobbing in her friend's arms, and Mrs. Barbara completely lost about how to handle the situation. Outside, Jason could hear the growing murmur of the guests. In a few minutes, he would have to face 200 people and explain why there would be no wedding that day. He would have to look his mother in the eye and admit that she was right about her suspicions. He would have to face his in-laws, who had spent their savings to make their daughter's dream come true. But first, he needed to find a place where he could process everything he had just found out about the woman he loved. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Inside the church sacristy, the atmosphere was charged with an almost palpable tension. Emily had stopped crying, but her hands trembled uncontrollably as Jessica tried to fix her smudged makeup. Amber paced back and forth, clearly agitated by the turn of events. Em, take a deep breath, said Jessica, holding her friend's face in her hands. Breathe with me, okay? In, out, in, out. How am I going to face everyone out there? Emily managed to say between sobs. How am I going to explain it to my parents? To his parents? To all the people who came to see us get married? First, you need to calm down, replied Amber, stopping her pacing and kneeling beside her friend. Then we'll figure out what to say. The important thing right now is for you not to panic. Mrs. Barbara reappeared at the door, her expression clearly showing that she had faced difficult situations in her 20 years of organizing weddings, but nothing like this. Girls, I spoke with the priest and we explained that there was an unforeseen issue. He suggested that you leave through the side door to avoid the guests for now. The parents of the bride and groom want to talk to both of you, and there are some people asking if they can help with anything. What kind of help? Asked Jessica. Well, Jason's aunt, Aunt Patricia, offered her house for you to talk with more privacy. And your mother's best friend, Mrs. Margaret, said she can help talk to the guests if you'd like. Emily looked up for the first time since Jason had left. Mrs. Margaret is here, she asked, surprised. Margaret had been like a second mother to her during her teenage years, especially after her parents separated when she was 15. I thought she couldn't come because of her surgery. She said she wouldn't miss her heart-daughter's wedding for anything in this world, replied Mrs. Barbara with a gentle smile. She's in the front row with your parents, and from what I noticed, she's quite worried. The mention of her parents made Emily feel a tightness in her chest. Her father, Richard Taylor, had worked double shifts these past months to pay for their share of the wedding. Her mother, Linda, had personally sewn every detail of the wedding dress. How was she going to explain that everything had been cancelled because she lied about her identity? Where are my parents now? Asked Emily, trying to stand up but feeling her legs weak. They're talking with Jason's parents in the next room. From what I heard, they're trying to understand what happened. Mrs. Barbara hesitated before continuing. Emily, I think it would be better if you talk to them before someone else tells the story wrong. Amber and Jessica exchanged a worried look. They had known the Taylor family since childhood and knew how Emily's parents would react badly upon discovering their daughter had lied about something so serious for so long. Em, do you want us to go with you? Offered Amber. No, I need to do this alone. Emily took a deep breath and tried to pull herself together. I've already caused enough trouble for everyone. At least I can have the decency to take responsibility for my actions. Jessica helped her friend stand up and smoothed the wrinkles of the wedding dress that now seemed too heavy, as if carrying the weight of all the lies Emily had told over the past years. Are you sure you want to do this now? Asked Jessica. Maybe it's better if you calm down first, gather your thoughts. No, Jess, I've put this off for too long, too. If I don't speak now, I'll never have the courage. Emily walked to the door, stopped and turned to her friends. Thank you for supporting me all these years. I know you always thought I should have told the truth from the beginning. We always wanted what's best for you, Em, said Amber, approaching for a hug. And we still do. No matter what happens today, you know you can count on us. With these words of encouragement, Emily left the sacristy and walked through the church hallway toward the room where her parents and Jason's parents waited. Each step seemed to echo like a drum, marking the rhythm of her racing heart. Outside the church, Jason had found a bench in the small square in front of the temple and was trying to gather his thoughts. Some people he recognized as wedding guests passed by him, clearly confused about what was happening, but he couldn't lift his head to greet them. Jason? A familiar voice made him look up. It was his best man, Mike, his best friend since high school. Man, what's going on? People inside are saying the wedding was cancelled. Not cancelled, Mike. Postponed. Jason rubbed his face with his hands. At least I think it's postponed. I don't know, man. I don't know anything anymore. Mike sat next to his friend, clearly concerned. Do you want to talk? Did something serious happen? Jason looked at his friend, remembering all the times Mike had been his confidant over the years. If there was anyone he could trust at this moment, it was him. Emily lied to me, Mike. For 4 whole years, she lied about who she is. What do you mean she lied about who she is? Jason told everything he had discovered in the last 40 minutes. Emily's previous marriage, the loss of the baby, the name change, the depression, the divorce that had been finalized just 6 months ago. Mike listened to everything in silence, occasionally shaking his head in disbelief. Dude, that's heavy, said Mike when Jason finished speaking. But can I ask you a question? Sure. At any point during these 4 years, did you suspect that Emily wasn't who she said she was? Jason thought for a moment before answering. Not exactly, but some things never made much sense. She never talked about her family in detail, Never wanted to visit the city where she grew up. Didn't have many pictures from when she was younger. And she always acted strange when I talked about ex-boyfriends or having children in the future. But you never questioned these things? I questioned a few times, but she always had an explanation. Said her family was complicated, that she didn't like reliving the past, things like that. And I kind of respected her space, you know. Thought everyone has a right to some secrets. Mike stayed silent for a few minutes, watching the movement in front of the church. Some guests were starting to leave, clearly confused about what was happening. Jason, can I give you my opinion? Please, I need someone to help me think. I think Emily messed up big time, man. Lying about having been married, about losing a child, about her own name. That's way too serious. But I also think you need to try to understand her side. Understand her side? Mike, she lied about her own identity. I know. But think with me. She went through a huge trauma, lost a child, found out she was being cheated on, had depression, panic attacks. Dude, some people never recover from things like that. And when she met you, she finally had the chance to start over, to be happy again. Do you think she lied out of malice, or because she was afraid of losing that? Jason considered his friend's words. Over the last 4 years, he had seen Emily struggle with anxiety attacks that she attributed to a stressful job. There were nights when she woke up crying, saying she had nightmares, but never told what she dreamed about. There were moments when she would be distant, lost in thoughts that seemed too painful to share. Maybe you're right about the reason, Mike, but that doesn't change the fact that she lied to me for 4 years. How am I supposed to trust her again? How will I know if she isn't lying about other things? That's a question only you can answer, man. But I can tell you one thing. In the last 4 years, I've seen you happier than ever. Emily may have lied about her past, but the love you two built is real. Anyone who sees you together can tell. Before Jason could answer, he saw his mother, Mrs. Deborah, approaching with quick steps, and an expression he knew well, the expression of someone about to say, "I told you so." "Jason Miller, can you explain to me what's this story about a cancelled wedding?" Mrs. Deborah stopped in front of him with her hands on her hips. "I just talked to Emily's parents, and no one can give me a decent explanation of what's going on." Jason sighed deeply. The time had come to face another difficult conversation. "Mum, sit here. I need to tell you something." Mrs. Deborah sat down next to her son, and Jason repeated the story he had just told Mike. With each new revelation, he could see his mother's expression changing from worry to anger, and then to a bitter satisfaction of having her suspicions confirmed. "I knew it," she exclaimed when Jason finished. "I always knew that girl was hiding something important. A mother feels these things, Jason. I tried to warn you many times, but you never wanted to listen. Mom, please, now is not the time for 'I told you so.'" Jason felt even more tired. "I need your help to decide what to do now." "What to do?" Mrs. Deborah stood up indignantly. "Jason, you're going to go back home, you're going to forget about that lying girl, and you're going to thank God you found out the truth before signing the papers. Can you imagine if you discovered this after you were married? What if you had children together and found out she had more secrets? Mom, it's not that simple." "Yes, it is. It's simple. A person who lies about who they are can lie about anything. You can't trust her, Jason, and marriage without trust doesn't work." Mike, who had remained silent during the conversation between mother and son, decided to speak up. "With all due respect, Mrs. Deborah, I think the situation is more complicated than that. Emily went through serious trauma before meeting Jason. Maybe she lied not out of malice, but out of fear." "Fear of what? Of being honest with the man she claimed to love?" Mrs. Deborah turned to Mike with impatience. "Mike, you're a good boy, but you're still young and don't understand how relationships work. A lie is a lie, no matter the excuse." "Perhaps you're right about a lie being a lie," Mike replied calmly. "But it's also true that everyone deserves a second chance, and that true love is rare to find." The conversation was interrupted by the approach of a group of people. Jason immediately recognized Emily's parents, Richard and Linda Taylor, accompanied by Mrs. Margaret, whom he had only met twice, but knew was very important to Emily. Richard Taylor was a 60-year-old man with graying hair and hands calloused from construction work. Linda was 55 and worked as a seamstress, respected in the neighborhood for the quality of her work. Mrs. Margaret, at 70 years old, walked slowly but with determination, leaning on a cane that was clearly more of a precaution than a real necessity. "Jason," said Richard, extending his hand in greeting, "I need to talk to you." "Of course, Mr. Richard." Jason stood up, noticing the man's eyes were red. "I just spoke with my daughter." Richard spoke slowly, as if each word required effort. "She told me about the things she didn't tell you before." Linda approached, and Jason could see she had been crying. "Jason, I want you to know that we didn't know anything about this," she said, her voice trembling. "If we had known that that she had gone through all that and hadn't told you, we would have talked to her. We didn't raise our daughter to lie." Mrs. Margaret tapped her cane on the ground to get attention. "Excuse me," she said, her voice firm despite her age. "May I give my opinion?" Everyone turned to the elderly woman, whom Jason knew was a respected figure in the community where Emily grew up. "Mrs. Margaret, you don't need to get involved in this situation," began Mrs. Deborah, but the elderly woman interrupted her with a gesture. "Deborah, I've known Emily since she was a 5-year-old child. I watched that girl grow up. I saw her go through her parents' separation as a teenager. I saw her leave home at 18 to try for a better life. And when she came back 5 years ago, I saw a shattered person trying to rebuild herself." Jason paid full attention to what Mrs. Margaret was saying. It was the first time he had heard someone talk about Emily before she appeared in his life. "The Emily who came back here wasn't the same cheerful girl who had left," continued Mrs. Margaret. "She was too thin, frightened, couldn't sleep properly. It took months for her to tell me what had happened in her marriage, how cruel that man had been to her, how he made her believe the infidelity was her fault, that she wasn't woman enough to keep him." Linda began crying louder upon hearing those details she hadn't even fully known herself. "When she told me she had lost the baby, and that her husband blamed her for that too, saying she was too stressed, too nervous, that's why she lost the child," Mrs. Margaret had to pause to take a deep breath. "I've never seen so much suffering in a person's eyes, Jason. Never." "Mrs. Margaret," Jason felt compelled to interrupt. "I understand Emily went through terrible things, and I'm sorry she suffered so much, but that doesn't justify lying to me for 4 years." "You're right, dear, it doesn't justify it," the elderly woman agreed. "But it explains it, and sometimes understanding why a person did what they did is the first step in deciding whether they're worth forgiving." Richard put his hand on Jason's shoulder. "Jason, I'm not here to defend what Emily did. She was wrong, terribly wrong, but I also can't help thinking that in the last 4 years I've seen my daughter happier than I'd ever seen her before. She started smiling again, started having dreams again, started believing she deserved to be loved again. Mr. Richard, I always loved Emily. If she had told me the truth from the beginning, none of this would be different." "Yes, it would, Jason," Linda interrupted. "You say that now, but would it really? If on your 3rd date she had told you she was a woman fresh out of a destroyed marriage, who had lost a child, who was undergoing psychological treatment, would you have kept dating her?" Linda's question hit Jason like a punch. He tried to imagine how he would have reacted if he had known all that at the very beginning of the relationship. At 24, he was looking for someone to build a light and happy life with. Would he have had the maturity to handle so much drama and pain? I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe not. I was younger, less mature. Maybe I would have run away." "Emily knew that," said Mrs. Margaret gently. "She's not stupid, Jason. She realized you two were building something special, and she was afraid of ruining it by talking about a past she was trying to overcome." Mrs. Deborah, who had remained silent during the conversation, finally spoke up. "This is all very beautiful and moving," she said with a slightly acidic tone. "But you're forgetting one important thing. Jason has the right to decide what kind of person he wants to marry. He has the right to choose whether he wants to deal with all this history." Emily took that right away from him when she decided to lie. "You're right, Mrs. Deborah," agreed Richard. "That's why we're here talking, so Jason can decide, now that he knows everything, what he wants to do." Mike, who had followed the whole conversation in silence, spoke to his friend. "Jason, can I ask you one more question?" "Go ahead. Do you still love Emily?" The simplest question of the afternoon was also the hardest to answer. Jason looked at the group of people around him, all waiting for his answer, and then looked at the church where Emily probably still was, facing her own difficult conversations. "I love the Emily I've known for 4 years," he answered slowly. "But now I don't know who that person is anymore. I don't know if the Emily I love really exists, or if she was just a character Rebecca created to win me over. There's only one way to find out," said Mrs. Margaret, tapping her cane on the floor again, "by talking to her. For real this time. No lies from either side." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Inside the church, Emily had finished telling the whole truth to her parents and now faced a silence that seemed eternal. Jessica and Amber remained by her side, offering silent support as she waited for some reaction. Her mother, Linda, was the first to speak. "Emily, sweetheart, why didn't you tell us any of this when you came back home?" Her voice was a mix of sadness and disappointment. "We knew something had happened, but you always said everything was fine." "Because I was ashamed, Mom," Emily replied without raising her eyes. "Ashamed of having failed in my marriage. Ashamed of having lost the baby. Ashamed of having let myself be treated that way for so long." Richard, who had been standing during the entire conversation, finally sat down next to his daughter. "Emily, you know that nothing that happened was your fault, right?" he said gently. "A husband who cheats doesn't cheat because of his wife, and a woman who loses a baby doesn't lose it because of something she did. These things happen, sweetheart. I know that in my head, Dad, but in my heart I still feel guilty sometimes." Mrs. Margaret, who had remained silent until then, approached and sat on the other side of Emily. "Dear, do you remember when you came to my house that first night 5 years ago? You knocked on my door at 2 in the morning, soaked from the rain, with a small suitcase and the saddest eyes I've ever seen in my life." Emily nodded, tears beginning to flow again. "Do you remember what you told me that night?" "I said I wanted to die," Emily whispered, "that I couldn't see meaning in anything anymore. And do you remember what I told you? You said everyone deserves a second chance, even us with ourselves." "Exactly. And that's what you did, Emily. You gave yourself a second chance to be happy. The problem is that you tried to build that second chance by hiding the first one." Jessica finally decided to speak. "Mrs. Margaret is right, Em. We always supported you, but we also always said you should tell everything to Jason, not because he had a right to know intimate details of your life, but because healthy relationships need honesty. And now I've lost him." Emily put her hands over her face. "I lost the man I love because I was too cowardly to trust him." Amber knelt in front of her friend. "Em, look at me," she said, holding Emily's hands. "You haven't lost him yet. He said the wedding was cancelled, not that the relationship was over. He said he needed time to think." "Amber is right," Linda agreed. "If Jason wanted to end everything, he would have said so. The fact that he asked for time means he still has feelings for you." "But how am I going to regain his trust?" asked Emily. "How am I going to prove that the love I feel is real if he doesn't believe anything I say anymore?" "By being completely honest from now on," replied Mrs. Margaret firmly. "Without hiding anything more, without making up excuses, without trying to protect anyone from the facts. The absolute truth, no matter how painful it may be." "And if he can't forgive me? If he decides he doesn't want to be with me anymore?" Richard took his daughter's hand. "Sweetheart, that's the risk every person in love takes. The risk of loving someone and not being loved back, or of doing something that hurts the person you love and losing that chance at happiness. But it's also possible that he understands your reasons and decides that your love is stronger than the mistakes of the past." "What I know is that you need to try," said Linda. "Because if you don't try, you'll spend the rest of your life wondering, what if?" Emily lifted her head and looked around. She was surrounded by people who loved her unconditionally, people who knew her flaws and still chose to support her. Maybe she could trust that Jason, who had shown love for her for 4 years, would also be capable of understanding and forgiving. "What do you all think I should do?" "First, you're going to take off that wedding dress and put on regular clothes," said Jessica practically. "Then you're going to go out there and have an honest conversation with Jason. You'll tell him everything you haven't told yet. You'll answer all the questions he has, and you'll let him decide whether he wants to try again or not. And if he says no?" "Then you'll cry, you'll suffer, you'll grieve the relationship," replied Amber, with the frankness only a true friend can have. "But at least you'll have peace of mind, knowing you tried to do the right thing." "And then you'll move on," added Mrs. Margaret. "Because that's life, dear. Sometimes we win, sometimes we lose. But we can never stop trying to be happy." Emily took a deep breath and stood up. For the first time in hours, she felt she had a plan, a clear goal. "Can you all help me talk to the guests afterward? Explain that the wedding was postponed for personal reasons." "Of course, honey," said Linda. "We'll handle all of that. You just need to worry about talking to Jason." "And Emily," said Richard, making her turn around, "no matter what happens today, I want you to know that I'm proud of the woman you've become. You've been through a lot of hard things and managed to rebuild yourself. That takes a lot of strength." "Thank you, Dad." Emily hugged her father for the first time in months without feeling the weight of the guilt she always carried. Jessica helped Emily change clothes, putting on a simple dress she had brought as a backup for the party. While they fixed her hair, which had gotten messy from crying, Amber mentioned she had seen Jason talking with several people outside the church. "He's talking with his parents, with Mike, and with your parents too," reported Amber. "It seems like he's trying to hear different opinions before making a decision." "Is that good or bad?" asked Emily. "I think it's good," replied Jessica. "It means he's taking the situation seriously, that he's not acting on impulse. Or it means he's trying to find reasons to end everything." Emily was still pessimistic. Stop that," said Amber firmly. "You spent 4 years imagining the worst possible scenario and torturing yourself in advance. Now is not the time to do that again. Now is the time to fight for what you want." When Emily was ready, Mrs. Margaret offered to accompany her to where Jason was. "If you want, dear. Sometimes it's easier to face difficult situations when we're not alone." "Thank you, Mrs. Margaret. But I think this conversation I need to have alone with him." "Are you sure?" "I am. If we're going to try to start over, it has to be just the two of us. No intermediaries, no outside opinions. Just me and him, talking openly." Emily walked toward the church exit, feeling her heart beat faster with each step. Outside, she could see Jason sitting on the park bench, still surrounded by several people, but now the conversation seemed calmer. She stopped at the church door for a moment, watching the man she loved. Even from a distance, she could tell he was tired, confused, hurt. And all of that because of her, because of the choices she had made. Taking one last deep breath, Emily left the church and walked toward the group. When Jason saw her approaching, the conversations quieted down until they stopped completely. All eyes turned to her. "Jason," she said when she was close enough, "can I talk to you? Alone?" Jason looked at the people around him, then at Emily. For a long moment he just watched her, as if trying to see through her, trying to figure out who she really was beneath all the layers of truths and lies. "You can," he finally replied. The other group members discreetly stepped away but didn't go too far. Mrs. Deborah clearly wasn't happy about leaving her son alone with Emily, but Mike convinced her to give the couple some space. Emily sat on the bench beside Jason, keeping a respectful distance between them. For a few minutes neither of them spoke. They just sat there side by side, watching the street activity and trying to find the right words. "I don't know where to begin," Emily finally broke the silence. "How about starting with your real name?" replied Jason. No malice in his voice, just weariness. "My birth name is Rebecca Taylor Johnson. Rebecca after my maternal grandmother, Taylor from my father, Johnson from my mother. But since I was little, I hated the name Rebecca. I thought it was too formal, too serious. I always asked everyone to call me Em." "And Emily?" "Emily was what I always wanted to be called. It was the name I used when I played with dolls, when I wrote in my diary, when I dreamed about who I wanted to be when I grew up, when I When I needed to restart my life, I chose to be Emily. I chose to be the person I always wanted to be. Jason absorbed this information slowly. Rebecca Taylor Johnson, he repeated. And you were married to Brian Thompson. I married him at 22, right after college. I thought I was in love, but looking back, I think I was more in love with the idea of marriage than with him specifically. And how long were you married? 3.5 years. But the last 2 years were difficult. He changed a lot after we got married, or maybe I just didn't know the real him before. Jason turned to look at her directly for the first time. Emily, I need to know, what other things haven't you told me? Because now I feel like everything I know about you could be a lie. The question Jason had asked was exactly what Emily feared most, but she also knew it was inevitable. She took a deep breath and decided that this time she would be completely honest, regardless of the consequences. There are a few other things, she admitted. They're not exactly lies, but they're omissions. Things I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to see me differently. What kind of things? For example, I didn't finish my psychology degree. I stopped in the last semester because I got pregnant, and Brian thought I didn't need to study anymore, that I should focus on being a mother and homemaker. When I lost the baby and discovered the cheating, I went back to finish the course, but it was very difficult. I couldn't concentrate. I had panic attacks in class. I ended up dropping out. Jason processed this information. All these years, he had believed Emily had a psychology degree, and that explained why she was so good at understanding people, so sensitive to others' emotions. And your job? Do you really work at the veterinary clinic? I do work there, but not as a trained veterinary assistant, like I let you believe. I work at the reception desk and help with basic tasks. Dr. Samantha, who owns the clinic, let me learn some things about animal care, but I don't have formal training. What else? My family story, Emily continued, feeling as if she were stripping her soul bare. I always let you believe my parents were married and that I had a stable family. But my parents separated when I was 15, and it was a very difficult separation. They kept fighting over money, over custody, over everything. For 2 years, I went to live with my grandmother because I couldn't stand being in the middle of that war anymore. Why did you lie about this? Because when I met you, you talked so much about how grateful you were to have parents who loved each other, to have a united family. I didn't want you to know that I came from a dysfunctional family. I wanted you to think that I was normal, stable. Jason stayed silent for a few minutes, absorbing all these revelations. With each new piece of information, he felt like he was getting to know a completely different person. Emily, do you have any idea how I feel right now? He finally asked. I feel like the last 4 years of my life have been based on one giant lie. But they weren't, Jay. Emily turned on the seat to face him. The feelings I have for you are real. The love we built is real. The happiness I felt by your side is real. I just hid the ugly parts of my story because I didn't want them to contaminate what we had. But those ugly parts are part of who you are, Emily. They explain your fears, your anxieties, your reactions. How am I supposed to truly understand you if I don't know these parts? You're right, she admitted. I thought I was protecting you, but I was actually keeping you from knowing the real person behind the edited version I created. Is there anything else? Any other secret? Any other important omission? Emily thought carefully before answering. She had promised herself she would be completely honest, and that meant hiding nothing more. There is one thing, she said hesitantly, about our intimate life. Jason felt his stomach clench. What else could there be? What thing? You always thought it was strange that I never wanted to try to have children with you. Even when we talked about marriage, about the future, I always changed the subject when you talked about having babies. I did. I always thought you just weren't ready yet. The truth is, I'm very afraid of getting pregnant again, not just because of the loss I had before, but because the doctors said I might have trouble carrying a pregnancy to term, and I'm terrified of going through that pain again. Jason watched Emily's face as she spoke, seeing tears form in her eyes as she recalled clearly painful memories. Why didn't you tell me this We could have talked about other options, adoption, treatments, I don't know. Because I didn't want you to stay with me out of pity. I didn't want you to think, poor thing, she lost a baby, now I'll take care of her. I wanted you to stay with me because you loved me. Not because you felt sorry for my sad story. Emily, love isn't pity, and taking care of someone you love isn't a burden, it's a privilege. Jason felt his anger begin to mix with a deep sadness. Did you really think I was that shallow, that I could only love the perfect version of you? It's not that I thought you were shallow, it's that I myself couldn't accept these parts of my story. How could I expect you to accept things that I myself rejected? That answer made Jason stop and really look at Emily. For the first time since she had started revealing the truth, he could see beyond his own hurt and recognize her suffering. Do you still reject these parts of your story? I'm learning to accept them. Therapy has helped me a lot these last few years, but it's still hard sometimes. What therapy? Oh, Emily let out a humorless laugh. One more thing I didn't tell you about. I've been in therapy for 3 years. I started right after we met, because I realized that if I wanted to build a healthy relationship with you, I needed to deal with my past traumas. You've been in therapy for 3 years and never told me. I always made up excuses for the session times. I said it was work meetings, doctor's appointments, things like that. Jason put his elbows on his knees and his head in his hands. The amount of information he was receiving was overwhelming. Emily, do you have any idea how many lies were necessary to keep all these secrets? How many times you had to make up excuses, change the subject, steer conversations away? I know, she answered softly. And I know how serious this is. I know I betrayed your trust in a way that will be very hard to repair. Why did you decide to tell everything today? Why didn't you keep hiding it? Emily took a while to answer, as if she were organizing her thoughts. Because last night, when I was trying on the dress for the last time, I looked at myself in the mirror and didn't recognize the person looking back at me. I saw a woman who was about to get married based on lies, and I realized that wasn't fair to either of us. And you didn't think about telling me before today, before our wedding day. I thought about it thousands of times, but every time I was about to start talking, I imagined your reaction. I imagined you leaving me. I imagined having to go back to being the broken Rebecca I was before I met you. And I couldn't find the courage. And today you found it? Today I realized that living a lie would be worse than risking losing you because of the truth. At least this way, if you decide to leave me, it will be a decision based on who I really am, not who I pretended to be. Jason raised his head and looked at Emily. There was something in her posture, in her voice, that seemed different. A raw honesty he had never seen before. And who are you really, Emily? He asked. Because now I don't know anymore. I'm a 28-year-old woman who went through traumas that marked me deeply, but who is trying to heal, she answered without hesitation. I'm someone who loves animals, and that's why I work at a veterinary clinic, even if it's not in the role I dreamed of. I'm someone who couldn't finish college because of difficult circumstances, but who didn't give up on learning and growing. I'm someone who comes from a complicated family, but who learned the value of true love exactly by knowing what it's like to live without it. She stopped for a moment, took a deep breath, and continued. And I'm someone who loves you more than anything in this world, but who was too cowardly to trust that you could love me knowing all these things. That's who I am, Jason. That's the whole truth. Jason was silent for a long time, processing not just her words, but the way she had said them. There was an authenticity there that he truly had never seen before. Emily, he said finally, I need to ask you a question, and I need you to be completely honest. Go ahead. If we decide to try again, if I can forgive and trust you again, do you promise you'll never hide anything important from me again, even if it's painful, even if you're afraid of my reaction? I promise, she answered without hesitation. I promise that from now on, if you give me this chance, you'll only know the truth about me, no matter how hard it is. Even knowing that the truth can sometimes hurt. Especially knowing that, because what I learned today is that hiding the truth hurts much more. Jason stood up from the bench and walked a few steps away, his back to Emily. She remained seated, respecting the space he needed to think, even though every second of silence felt like an eternity. When he turned back to her, Emily could see tears in his eyes. "Emily, I need you to understand something," he said, sitting back down beside her. "What you did, hiding who you really are, lying about your past, inventing a person to be with me, that destroyed the foundation of trust in our relationship." Emily felt her heart sink, preparing herself to hear that he had decided to end everything. "But," Jason continued, "I also need to recognize that you didn't do this out of malice. You did it out of fear, out of insecurity, because you were trying to protect yourself from more pain." "Jason—" "Let me finish," he asked gently. "I need you to know that I understand your reasons. I may not agree with your choices, but I understand why you made them. And I need you to know also that even with all this pain and confusion I'm feeling right now, I still love you." Emily felt the tears return in full force. "You still love me?" "I love the Emily I've known for the last 4 years. And I think that Emily is real, even if she was built on some lies about the past. The moments we lived together, the laughter we shared, the conversations we had, the affection we showed each other. None of that was a lie, was it?" "None of it was a lie, Jay. None. Every happy moment, every show of love, every plan we made, all of that was always real." "Then maybe we can find a way to rebuild our foundation of trust. Start from scratch, but this time with the complete truth." Emily looked at him with a mixture of hope and disbelief. "Are you saying that you want to try again?" "I'm saying that I want to try. It won't be easy, Emily. It will take time for me to trust you completely again, and it will take a lot of work on your part to prove that you've changed, that you're committed to honesty. I'm willing to do anything, Jay. Anything it takes. First, we're going to need professional help. Couples therapy, to learn to communicate better and for me to process this whole situation. I completely agree. Second, we're going to need to start over slowly. Not as fiancés, but as a couple that's truly getting to know each other for the first time." "Okay. How long do you think you'll need?" "I don't know, Emily. Maybe months, maybe years. There's no formula for rebuilding trust." Emily took his hands in hers. "Jason, I want you to know that I will wait as long as necessary. And if at any point you decide you can't forgive me, I will accept and respect your decision. I just ask one thing. Give me a real chance to show you who I really am." Jason looked at their intertwined hands, then at Emily's face. "Okay," he said. "We'll try." Emily couldn't contain a small smile, the first genuine smile of the day. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for not giving up on us. I still don't know if it will work, Emily. But I also can't give up on 4 years of love without at least trying to understand who you really are." They sat in silence for a few minutes, still holding hands, processing everything that had happened in the last day. The church behind them still had a few people leaving, carrying flowers that would have been used in the decorations for the party that wouldn't be happening. "And now?" asked Emily. "What do we do about this whole situation? The guests, the cancelled party? Now we're going to talk to our families and explain that we've decided to postpone the wedding indefinitely. We'll apologize for the trouble and the embarrassment. And then you'll go back to your apartment. I'll go back to mine, and we'll start getting to know each other again the right way this time." Emily nodded, understanding that even though Jason had decided to try again, things couldn't just go back to normal as if nothing had happened. "Can I ask you for a favor?" she asked. "You can. When you're ready, when you feel comfortable, could you tell me how you're feeling about all this? Not to reassure me or protect me, but honestly, because I want to learn to handle the truth too, even when it's hard to hear." Jason smiled for the first time since the whole situation had begun. "I can do that," he said. "Actually, honesty will have to work both ways if we want this to work out." "I completely agree." They stood up from the bench, and Jason looked at Emily with a serious but not hostile expression. "Emily, before we talk to everyone, I need to tell you something." "What?" "I'm still hurt. Very hurt. And I'm still confused about many things. The fact that I've decided to try again doesn't mean everything is forgiven and forgotten. I understand. It's going to be a long process, and sometimes it's going to be hard. Are you sure you're prepared for that?" Emily looked into his eyes and nodded with determination. "Jason, I spent 4 years building lies to keep you in my life. Now I'm willing to spend however many years it takes building truths to deserve you back." "Then let's go talk to everyone and explain the situation." They walked back toward the church, where their families and friends were still waiting for an explanation about what had happened. With every step, Emily felt a mix of nervousness and hope. Nervousness because she knew there would still be many difficult conversations ahead, but hope because for the first time in years, she was being completely honest about who she was. When they got close to the group, Jason stopped and turned to her once more. "Emily?" "Yes?" "Thank you for finding the courage to tell the truth, even if it was at the worst possible time. Thank you for finding the generosity to give me a second chance, even after everything I did wrong." With those words, they approached their families to face together the consequences of the choices they had made, and hopefully begin building a future based on truth and mutual trust. The sun was setting when Jason and Emily finally finished talking with all the guests and family members. It had been a long and emotionally draining afternoon, but a necessary one. Some people had reacted with understanding, others with judgment, but everyone eventually respected the couple's decision to try to rebuild their relationship. Mrs. Deborah was still visibly unhappy about the situation, but the firm support from her husband and Mrs. Margaret had helped calm things down. Emily's parents, although disappointed by their daughter's lies, showed pride that she had found the courage to tell the truth and fight for what she wanted. Now, standing in front of Emily's house, they were saying goodbye for the first time since deciding to start over. "So," said Emily, clearly reluctant to part from him. "So we'll talk tomorrow," replied Jason. "I'll call you in the morning and we'll set up a time to have coffee and talk more." "Okay, and Jason?" "Yes?" "Once again, thank you for everything." Jason gave a half smile and leaned in to give her a kiss on the forehead, a caring gesture, but one that maintained the appropriate distance for the moment. "Good night, Emily. Get some rest." "Good night." Emily went into the house and leaned against the door, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. On one hand, she felt exhausted by the emotional intensity of the day. On the other, she felt lighter than she had in years, as if an enormous weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She had told the truth, the whole truth, and Jason, against all her expectations, had chosen to try again. It wouldn't be easy, she knew that. But for the first time in a long time, Emily felt she had a real chance to be happy being exactly who she was. Jason, for his part, drove home in silence, still processing everything he had discovered about the woman he thought he knew completely. He was hurt, confused, but also relieved. Yes, strangely relieved. Many things that had never made sense in Emily's behavior now had an explanation. And despite the pain of the betrayal of trust, he could understand why she had made the choices she did. Rebuilding trust would be difficult, but Jason felt it was worth trying. After all, the love he felt for Emily was real, and he had seen today a version of her that, although wounded and imperfect, was genuine in a way he had never seen before. Perhaps, he thought as he parked the car, true relationships were really about accepting all parts of the person you love, including the broken parts, the scared parts, the parts that made mistakes trying to protect themselves. In the days that followed, Jason and Emily began the long process of getting to know each other again. This time, however, with complete honesty. Emily told details about her previous marriage that were difficult to hear, but that helped Jason better understand her reactions and fears. Jason, for his part, was honest about his own feelings of betrayal and about how long he thought he would need to trust her again. They began couples therapy with a psychologist specializing in rebuilding trust in relationships. The sessions were intense and sometimes painful, but both were committed to the process. Emily also decided to go back to school, this time taking a technical course to become a veterinary assistant, to formalize the work she was already doing. Jason supported her in this decision, seeing in it a sign that she was truly willing to be honest about her limitations and work to overcome them. 3 months after the day that should have been their wedding, Jason and Emily were sitting on the same bench in the little park where they had the conversation that changed everything. "How are you feeling?" asked Emily, a question that had become routine between them. "Better," answered Jason honestly. "Still hurt sometimes, but better. And you?" "Scared, but hopeful. Scared because I know I can still lose you if I can't prove I've changed. Hopeful because for the first time in years I can be myself without fear." Jason took her hand, a gesture he had started doing again recently. "Emily, can I tell you something I'm realizing?" "Of course." "I'm falling in love with you again, with the real person this time, and it's different from what I felt before." "Different how?" "Before I loved an idealized version of you. Now I'm learning to love the whole person, with traumas, fears, mistakes and all. And somehow that feels more solid, more real." Emily felt tears in her eyes, but this time they were tears of happiness. "Jason, do you think someday we'll actually be able to get married?" "I don't know," he answered honestly, "but I know I want to keep trying. One day at a time." "One day at a time," she repeated, squeezing his hand. They sat there for a while longer, watching the world go by around them. They didn't have all the answers about the future, but they had something they had never had before, a relationship based on the complete truth about who they were. And for now, that was enough. The end of the story. Dear listener, now we want to know, do you believe Jason made the right decision by giving Emily a second chance? Are there situations in life where lying for love can be understandable? Share your opinion in the comments and tell us where you're listening from. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories about love, forgiveness, and new beginnings. Thank you so much for your company.